Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you for another week. We're here to keep moving along. We're going to keep talking football. We're going to talk about all kinds of other stuff, and we're going to jump right into it. So that's kind of what we're going to do. So let's jump into this. Let me tell you a little preview of what is on today's episode. So we're going to do a quick update on the women's basketball roster and the latest pickup that Gavin Peterson got. An update to the football schedule, a look at official visits as we get closer to that, and then close out with our post-spring offensive position breakdown. So we'll do that, but first, before we get into all that, let me tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. Everyone's on their own financial path, and some stretches feel smooth while others need a little more guidance. That's something I really like about Canyon View Credit Union. They're not just there for the big milestones, they're there for the all between moments too. The ones where you're figuring things out, making progress, and moving forward with confidence towards your next big step. Canyon View Credit Union gives you tools and guidance to keep growing. No matter where you are at your journey, Canyon View Credit Union can help you spend, earn, grow, and progress. So wherever you're headed next, it's good to have them along for the ride. Learn more at canyonviewcu.com. Canyon View Credit Union, shaping your financial journey. All right, now that we got all that stuff out of the way, let's jump into what we're going to talk about today. So first off, I want to tease a little bit of what we're going to be doing in this off season. So today, like I said, we're going to do a position breakdown post spring of what is taking place for Utah on the offensive side of the ball. Last week we did the defensive side of the ball, kind of give you a little position breakdown that way to kind of help you understand what's happening there. Today we'll get on the offensive side. But moving forward next week is when we're going to start our schedule breakdown. So we're going to take every single team that Utah has this season, and we're going to go a little deep into what's going on. And not everything will be figured out, right? I mean, it's still the off season. Fall camp is going to be a pivotal point for all of these programs. But we're going to go through all of this, look at who the transfers were, look who they've lost, that kind of stuff, as we try to break down Utah's schedule to give you a more complete understanding of what is taking place this year. So I get it. It's summer. You're probably, it's getting to be summer. School's out soon, and you're probably going to be taking trips and everything. But I hope these will serve as an opportunity for you to look back on and get a preview, right? And kind of understand what is taking place that way. So starting next week, we'll do two. I'm debating on whether I break it up into one episode, like I have been, where I do this every Wednesday, and I'll feature two teams, or I'll break it up into two different episodes, each focusing on one different team. So if you're listening to this right now and you want to let me know how you feel on that, let me know, and we'll kind of break these down. But next week we'll start that. This will gear us up to Big 12 Media Days, so we should have enough time where we're doing two teams every single week, where by the time we finish that, we'll be heading into Big 12 Media Days, and obviously really kind of start the unofficial start of football. It's the beginning of July, and so there's still some off weeks and all that, but that'll ramp us up to that, and we'll kind of get into that. And like I said, sprinkled out through, or like I said last time, I didn't say this really yet, but last time in our last episode, I talked about some interviews that'll be coming up. Still waiting for those to officially be scheduled. We'll try to give you a picture of everything that is taking place in Utah athletics. So we'll kind of get to that. So first, let's start with the women's basketball program. So going up until last week or this week, Utah had only gotten 12 players on their roster of the 15 that you can have. Now, that's a fine roster to have. Generally speaking, you're only playing about 8, 9 players at most of the time. And so 12, you need to have some depth. You need to have some competition. But yesterday, so Tuesday, Utah added another player from the transfer portal, and this one's a good pickup. Elise Livingston, she's a guard from Utah State, so she's transferring in, staying close to home. She went to Ridgeline High School. A good opportunity to be able to stay close, and a position of need for Utah, and not even just the position of need, more so the ability to be able to have veteran leadership. Now, there's still more that Elise Livingston can provide, She has been a starter for most of the time up at Utah State from her freshman and sophomore season. So she's coming in as a junior, having already had experience. Like, that's going to go a long way, but there's still more to her game that they're going to want to see and being able to approve. So, as a 2 year starter, last year she averaged 8.1 points, 2.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Shot 38% from the field and then 36.2% from 3-point range on 4.3 attempts. So, fits really well into kind of Utah's model. Obviously, you want to be able to have those 3-point shooters, pair that with who you can get on the inside, where you can get a little bit more post play and that kind of stuff. So I think this is a good fit. Like I said, more for the veteran experience than anything is the opportunity to be able to get in there and help this unit who is going to be very heavily youth, to be able to provide some of that veteran leadership of experience at the D1 level and being able to give Utah an opportunity to compete. So good opportunity for Gavin Peterson and his squad. This brings them to 13 of 15, which I think is a good number. You can still bring on 2 other players, but by and large, you're probably not going to be looking for starter caliber players at that point. It's more depth, but I think this is a good opportunity for Utah to be able to round out kind of their roster for the next season and being able to help with that. Of the 13 players now, she makes it 4 from the state of Utah. 3 of those players are incoming freshmen. That was a big recruiting front for Utah this year, is hit heavy in Utah. As you know, obviously you want to get players anywhere they are, but being able to have that opportunity to get people that buy into the program is always a good sell, right? You want to be able to have people that have watched Utah, that are committed to Utah, that have family close. Those things matter. And like I said, not to say that that doesn't matter for other players, but at the same time, when you have that buy-in, that helps a ton to be able to really just get people to buy into that program. So good opportunity there. Next up, this is the time of the season where the TV windows, the schedules start being released. We do know Utah's schedule. That's not anything secret. But this is the time of the year where Friday games or the non-conference games get scheduled on the TV. So we get at least an idea of what the TV time windows are. And the only time that we have right now, we should be getting the rest here soon, is the Black Friday game. So Utah will be playing another Black Friday game. This seems to be a consistent theme for Utah. The Big 12 likes to put them on that window, and for whatever reason, it's not against BYU, which, another debate for another time of why we shouldn't have, a rivalry game on rivalry weekend, but that's neither here nor there for this opportunity. But Utah will be hosting this year. The last couple years, I've been traveling on Thanksgiving to get to these Black Friday games and missing time with family. So good opportunity for me to be able to actually stay home with family this year. But yes, Utah gets their Black Friday game, and they get it in a good window, quite honestly. The last couple years, the Black Friday game for Utah has been earlier in the morning or early afternoon. And it just, that's a tough sell, right? You're coming off of Thanksgiving. You're kind of a little sleepy from the day before, all the food and everything there. Now you get an opportunity to be able to have that Black Friday game, but the game is set for 6 or 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So you're going to get a late game. It's going to be a good window for Utah where, everybody's kind of had that day off. You're looking to wind down at the end of the day. And by the way, this is going to be on Fox, the main channel. So good opportunity for Utah to be able to showcase whatever their case may be at the end of the season against a program that on paper Utah should be better than, right? At this point, we're obviously going to know who Utah is. We're going to know if Morgan Scalley was successful in his first season as a head coach. Utah may be in contention for a Big 12 title. They may not. Either way, this is going to be a good opportunity to, one, send the seniors out, two, to broadcast kind of the opportunity of Utah football on broadcast television, and send those seniors out on a high note. So really good opportunity, in my opinion. If you do have to play on Black Friday, that's probably the best window because you're going to have a lot of eyeballs on you. You're going to have an opportunity to settle into the day so you're not sluggish. But those games are always tough because it's senior day. And so you're going to have those emotions that are coming in there. Devin Dampier is going to be a senior. And so what does that mean? Like what does his season look like and how's that going to impact Utah? And so really curious to see kind of how that all comes together and and what takes place there. So we're still waiting to find out the non-conference schedule. My understanding is that it should be anytime this week. They're kind of rolling that out. It's TBD. But you've got the Idaho game, which is the first game of the season. That one's going to get thrown onto ESPN3, quite honestly. I can't imagine that isn't an ESPN3 type show. You might get something different, but that's probably an afternoon game. Your regular season start opener, that's the FCS opponent. That's what it's going to be. Then the next week you have Arkansas, and varying degrees of what will happen that week will determine this. But I still think that's a game that the Big 12 / the networks are going to want to promote. Now, whether that gets on to, let's say, Fox or ESPN or something, like that remains to be seen. But I think because it's a Big 12 versus SEC, that's going to matter a little bit more. And so you're going to see probably a better window for that. But I quite honestly, I forgot to look. I meant to do that before this podcast, to look what games are being played that week to kind of see what is taking place. But that should be a game that should matter and people should be paying attention to. So you've got that. And then lastly, you round out non-conference play with Utah State at home. All of these games in non-conference this year at home. So you get a good opportunity to have all that. Last year it was 2 on the road. This year you get an opportunity to have all 3 of these games at home, which can help and hurt, because especially with this team and the youth, especially on the offensive line, that gives them an opportunity to kind of settle in a little bit more and not feel like they have to travel and have that jump in as well. All right, let's now move on to official visit season. This is the time of the year where recruits are able to take their official visit to Utah, right? So you're going to start seeing a lot of that with Utah players, or Utah recruits, I should say, where Utah's going to be hosting a lot of these players and being able to put their best effort out there and try to convince these players to sign with the program, right? And so you've got a lot of changes that are going to take place in this time, and there's going to be a lot of visitors. Really curious to see how Morgan Scalley handles it this year. This will be his first opportunity to really showcase his recruiting strategy and what he wants to do. In years past, Utah filled up, especially the last few years, Utah, filled up a lot of players, trying to reach for certain players, trying to, host certain players that are going to help. And I'm curious to see what Morgan Scalley does here, right? Is he going to shrink that number of official visitors? Is he going to try to grow it? Is he still going to try to reach for some players? Where does his recruiting strategy fit in? And, there's been some telltales along the way, but I think this is going to be the first indication of where Utah's at, right? What they're able to do and kind of what they're shooting for. And so right now, as it stands, and this is very fluid situation, that situation with official visits changes on the weekly basis. And so there's usually about a 4-week stretch where these official visits can take place. They can take place beyond that, but this is generally the 4-week period that takes place, starting with May 29th. So that'll be your first opportunity to start seeing some of these players. So we're still a couple weeks out, but you've got a bunch of these players that are going to start coming out and visiting Salt Lake City, trying to figure out where they want to go for school. And so you're going to start seeing some commitments, right? And you're going to start seeing some of the things going on there. But like I said, it's a fluid situation. We're going to get a good sense of how Morgan Scalley is approaching this, who he's attracting, who he's approaching, that kind of stuff. So I can't remember if I just said this, but they've got about 35 scheduled right now. There's about 10 or so that I know are either scheduled or in limbo. So that puts it at about 45 players right now that are, potentially visiting Utah. Some of these players will cancel because they commit to somewhere else. Others that, aren't scheduled already will happen. So, this can grow. Last couple of years, it's gotten to be about 50 to 60. So we'll see what takes place. And some of these players will commit later on in the year. Some will commit in the summer. Some will still do their official visit in the fall as they get to watch. But this is going to be the most pivotal point of that, is trying to get the players that you need. I'm curious to see if there's any changes to Scalley and what he wants to do with this, but I think it's still going to be pretty similar. Trying to get a lot of these guys scheduled now so that by the time you enter fall, you can then transition to the next year's class and try to move it that way. So that's that case. So like I said, May 29th is when these players start coming in. The 29th will be a busy day for Utah. They have a bunch of players coming in that day, and I'm not going to list all of those right now. But as we get closer, we'll kind of really kind of hone in on some of that stuff and help. My colleague Steve Bartle, he's very heavily involved in the recruiting front, as you may know if you understand who Steve Bartle is, and so he's going to have a lot of I would say a better understanding of the recruiting front than I will, just simply because that's more of his forte. But we're both going to tag team some of this effort, and he's leading the charge on the recruiting front for sure. But with that, let me tell you a few names that you can be paying attention to. These are players that Utah's in the running for, that they may be, at the top of their list, or they may be players that they're shooting for, right? Like there could be a whole bunch of players here and what they do. I'm not going to list all 35, 45 players that have official visits scheduled, but highlight a few of these. One of those is 4-star wide receiver Blake Wong out of California. He's narrowed it down to his top 5, where Utah is in that. So he's got BYU, Ohio State, Oregon, UCLA, and Utah. Quite honestly, Ohio State's going to be really tough to beat here. I've heard that that's a strong pull for him. Obviously, Oregon's a strong pull for a lot of players as well, especially if you want to stay out on the West Coast. So that's going to be a tough sell. Stay at home, go to UCLA, that kind of stuff. And then you've got BYU and Utah. Utah has a good inroads there. They've had a good connection the entire way. So there's potential there. I don't want to say Utah's out of the mix there by any means, but it will be an uphill battle to be able to bring in Blake Wong and commit him. But if you can get that relationship to stay, if you can get him to commit, I mean, that's a huge win for Utah. I think, quite honestly, this year and how Utah is able to utilize their wide receivers is going to go a long way in being able to attract that type of talent. Quite honestly, Utah hasn't done a good job of attracting wide receiver talent, especially high-end talent, over the years, simply because the bread and butter has always been the run game, right? This is not a surprise. Kyle Whittingham loved his run game. And the passing game, the knock always was you come to Utah as a wide receiver to block. So not always entirely true, but still true at the same time. So I think, regardless of what happens this offseason, in the summer, if he decides to make his commitment in the offseason or in the summer, that still will carry some weight and value in the fall, as they ramp up into the signing day, because you get to see how Utah's utilizing their wide receivers and what Morgan Scalley wants to do. So even if there's something that goes on this summer with Blake Wong or any of these other players, obviously the season is going to help with some of that. But this is the time where you get to bring them out, you get to see everything and help. So that'll be a big opportunity for Utah. A couple other players coming there that are 4-stars during that May 29th time is Lincoln Mageo, an inside offensive lineman from California. Another player that they'd obviously love to have. Linemen are going to be the bread and butter, and I don't think anything's going to change with Scalley and how he approaches that. He wants to have a physical trench play. He wants to make sure that his lines are stout and effective. And so bringing in, top players is going to be a key consideration. Then you've got 4-star athlete Ronnie Gomiller. He's from the state of Illinois. He's going to be a top target as well. But right now, as it stands, he's probably a Michigan State lean. That can change. This was the early look, but that was kind of the early look there. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see how that one goes, what's going to happen there. And rounding out that, there's more players coming on May 29th, but rounding out that is 3-star quarterback Noah Spinks. He's from Texas. This is going to be a key player for Utah. That's not to say that they believe that he is the quarterback of the future, but I think he's one of the quarterbacks that they're going to focus in on. There's another quarterback who has an unscheduled date. I'll talk about him in a second, but it's maybe middle of June that they're penciling in potentially. But you've got opportunities there for 2 quarterbacks that they're going to push heavily on to see if they can move forward, and move forward with that. So let's just jump to that other quarterback. It's 3-star Ben Musser. He's from the state of Georgia. He is already committed to Appalachian State. So, you'd have to get a flip there. But if Utah can get the right sell and he does actually make a trip out to Utah, there's good potential there for him to be able to have a higher ranking as well as be kind of the star of the class in terms of the quarterback, right? I think he's probably more coveted than Noah Spinks, but that remains to be seen with their senior seasons in high school and what they're able to do. So you got that. Then there's 3-star Dylan Sykes. He's a wide receiver from California. This, in my opinion, is pretty heavy Utah lean. I think you're going to see, quite honestly, a commitment from him. I could be wrong, right? But I believe that Dylan Sykes is probably a Ute. He's a guy that they really love as a wide receiver. I know he unofficially visited a while back ago and loved his time at Utah. So I think there's a good connection there. And barring something changing over the next few weeks or whatever that may be, you're going to see somebody that is committed to Utah and going on their official visit. Then there's local prospect Bodie Sparrow. He's getting a lot of love, and he's going to be one of the top names in the state of Utah. Right now, he's an Oklahoma lean. I know he grew up as their family is a Utah family, but that doesn't mean anything. I know fellow member of the state. What am I trying to say here? Another recruit from the state of Utah is trying to bring him to Oklahoma. So there's a push there to try to get them together. But Bodie Sparrow would be a great get for Utah if they can bring him in from Davis High. But we'll see there. And then lastly, the last two I'll talk about is 4-star corner Camille Loud. He's out of Nevada. I believe it was Bishop Gorman. Forgot to write that one there, but I believe he's out of Bishop Gorman. Another corner type player, lengthy guy that they want to be able to have and come into the roster. And then there's an offensive tackle in Jake Hildebrand. He's out of Arizona. He has his top 4 of Arizona State, Oregon, Texas A&M, and Utah. And his commitment date is going to be on May 19th. So he's actually going to be doing that next week. What is that? Is that Monday? I can't remember. My days are all out of whack. But that's going to be Monday. He hasn't made any official visits yet. So he's going to announce a commitment before he actually visits any of these programs. He has visited in a lot of these programs as an unofficial or a junior days, those types of things. But he wants to get that official commitment out of the way. Does that mean it leans a little bit more to Arizona State because he's an in-state kid, or is that somewhere else? We'll see. You obviously want to be able to put your best foot forward before somebody commits, but at the same time, he's not committing, in the middle of he's committing before he takes any of these visits. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But having another, top offensive tackle would go a long way for Utah in what they're able to do. So that's going to be something to pay attention to. Now, for Utah, the commits that they have right now, they've got 3. They got one actually, what is today? Oh, they got one yesterday. Yeah. So yesterday they got Jonah Malaya. He's a running back out of Skyline. So here in the state of Utah, a good pickup for Utah. He's not, quite honestly, I don't think he's going to be the star running back that Utah's looking for, but he's going to be a key contributor for this roster moving forward. So don't be surprised if Utah continues to recruit at the running back position. This is a guy that they love. They obviously want the in-state guy, but this is probably not the top of the class for the running back position. Then you've got Kingston Parks. Kingston, this is the brother of Money Parks, so you're familiar with him. He's been committed for a very long time. He committed back in November 20th of last year. He's remained committed. He was the first commit for Utah. Well, not entirely true. You did have a player that has decommitted, but you do have Kingston Parks who, had committed early, and assuming that he keeps that commitment, Utah's going to have another Parks in their room. And I think that's a good opportunity to kind of keep that momentum moving forward and give Utah kind of the upper hand, knowing that his older brother was already on the roster. So there's that. And then on April 22nd, you got a commitment from a defensive lineman in Tiki Teeples. He'll have an official visit on June 5th, and so you'll get him in here as well. But that's where it stands right now. Is Utah's got 3, so you've got a running back, wide receiver, and a defensive lineman. I don't want to say nothing's jumping out at that moment, but I think it's early to kind of see how Utah's focusing in on this and kind of where they're at. So that's kind of where it is. So this will be a pivotal point for Utah moving forward. This is what it's going to be, and so we'll kind of get a better understanding, like I said, of Morgan Scalley and what he wants to do, and then we'll kind of ramp up and see what's taking place. All right, let's finish the episode today with our defense or offensive look, excuse me, post spring. So some of this is going to be pretty obvious. I think some of these offensive players are pretty easy to understand. So, if you've listened to any past episodes or you've been following along during the spring, some of this is going to be pretty easy. I think people don't always pay attention to the defensive side of the ball, and so that one comes as a little bit more of a surprise. Whereas offense, people just naturally gravitate to that. And so I think it's going to be much easier to kind of describe what's happening. Plus, that's easier to kind of contextualize stats and everything there. Sometimes the defensive stats don't always work in terms of understanding for a lot of people. So for whatever reason, that's what it is. So offense, let's start with the offensive line. As we've talked about many times, the offensive line is really going to be where Utah understands what it has, right? I think on defense and on offense, you've got a good complementary set of players that can make this team complementary to what last season was, right? I think Utah has what it takes, mixed with its schedule, that it can win 10 plus games this season, right? I think there's enough there that Utah can be at the top of the Big 12. Not saying that they will be in the Big 12 title game or that they'll win the conference, but I think they have the talent and depth all around on their roster that they can be at the top of the Big 12. The biggest contributing factor to this success of this season will be this offensive line. It's no surprise Utah's offensive line last year, laden with veteran players. You obviously have 2 first-round talents on, anchoring on your tackles. You're not going to have that. Like, no matter how good this offensive line is going to be, they're just not going to compare to that because that's a generational type line. And I don't know that you're necessarily going to get that another year after that, right? Not to say that you can't keep building to that. I think Utah's going to hit this very hard and trying to keep building their offensive linemen and all that, but you just are going to have a step down. Now, that's not to say that this offensive line is going to be terrible. It's just you're going to get a step down in talent and what you're able to do. So with that as kind of the context, you do have an offensive line that is going to be brand new. Now, they're brand new in the sense that all 5 of these players haven't played together in consecutive snaps, right? Like they all haven't been lined up together in a game and worked. There's maybe been 1 or 2 of them mixing in or giving guys time off, or whether it be injury or just needing a breather. Some of these guys have already played, and I'll read off some of these snaps that we've got. But for the most part, the majority of these players on this line are going to be playing together for the first time. And so it's going to be a really interesting experience to see how they gel. We talked about in spring how some of that was good, some of it was bad. There was moments where Morgan Scalley talked about the offensive line being one of the biggest surprises, and then moments where you saw where the defense is wreaking havoc on that offensive line. And some of that is situational in the sense that there were certain things that Utah was working on that maybe was a challenge, or different things that they're trying to implement that nobody's going to feel comfortable with, and so everybody's going to be out of sync, and so you naturally give your defensive line and the defense in general an easier chance. But I think by and large, we're going to see the success of this team based on the offensive line. So as it stands, this is kind of my look at what the offensive line will be. This is partially what we saw in spring. They did mix it around from time to time, but for the most part, this is probably the most consistent line for your starters. And, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the line heading into fall. With that said, I can see some of this changing in fall, right? And I can see some of these players who have taken some steps forward in the offseason and progressed. You can have a guy, let's say like Spencer Fano, when he came in as a freshman, he didn't immediately start either, but he quickly jumped into that line and they were able to kind of acclimate him and get him in there. Is that the same for a guy like Kelvin Obot? I don't know. We'll find out. So the starters that I have penciled in right now, I'm going to be pretty, like I've got 5 or 6 players right here listed in the starters. And so it's not going to be anything earth shattering, but your left tackle, whatever it is, your left tackle. There we go. Left tackle will be Zeraway Williams. I think he's just done enough. He's really kind of hit his stride and being consistent and physical and what he's able to do, that he makes it a no-brainer to be your left tackle. Now, that's not to say that somebody else can't beat these guys out, but I just think this is your odds-on favorite for your left tackle. So he's played 156 snaps as of last year. That's what he played last year. He's played more in totality, but he's, last year 156 snaps. Grading in terms of Pro Football Focus, offensive linemen, a lot of times I look at Pro Football Focus because that's kind of the best way that you can get an assessment of it. There's other measures out there, but Pro Football Focus is probably the easiest and the most to conceptualize with this. His total offensive score is relatively low. Part of that is, he's coming in at different units, different situations. His run blocking is probably his worst graded area, and that's going to obviously have to improve. But his pass blocking was actually second best on the team last year. Now, like I said, 156 snaps, so there's less chances for things to go wrong, but that's still enough snaps to give you enough of an idea that he can do it. So pass block, and especially with what Utah wants to do, being more pass heavy, that can be a very good situation for Utah with him at the left tackle position to protect Devin Dampier, to open up what you need in the passing game. That's not a guarantee, right? It's not to say that he's going to put up those same numbers or that things are going to just be guaranteed, it's going to be guaranteed success because of that. But I think you've got a good opportunity there where that is his strong suit. You still need to improve in the run game, run block, but by and large, you have to like what you've seen in spring. If I remember right, he didn't really get blown up a ton on that side of the ball. So good things coming from him, but once again, he's got to gel with the rest of the line. Left guard, Solatoa Moiai, I believe he's going to be the guy that gets the nod there at left guard. He's got he has the most reps of the guys that have been at Utah. He has 336 snaps last year. His offensive grade was a 62.2, run blocking a 53.1, so another low number, and his pass blocking was a 77.4, so pretty solid. As context, let me kind of tell you what Spencer Fano was at, and Spencer Fano obviously was named the best lineman in the country, so that's a high bar, but his offensive grade was an 83.9. So both of these players are in the 60s, quite a drop off there. His run blocking was graded out as a 79.9, which was, pretty solid grade, one of the top. And then pass blocking, he was an 81.5. So some of these, like I said, the Zeraway Williams, his pass blocking was better than Spencer Fano's, but that's not to say that he's going to be better. You know what I mean? Like it's just more of a contextualized thing. So Solatoa Moiai, he's got experience. He's been on that line a lot. I think that really helps cement a lot of what he's able to do. And I think that's going to be a good opportunity for Utah there. Now at center, this is where the biggest debate is going to be. And the debate is mostly coming down to snaps, right? Whomever wins this job has to be fundamental in what they do with their snapping. There have been issues in spring with snapping. So you could have a guy like Alex Harrison, who is the vet, the guy that's had the most success and experience with Utah, who has probably the upper hand just simply because he's been there. But if he can't get snapping down, maybe you turn to Isaiah Kema, the Ohio State transfer, who is younger, doesn't have as much experience, but if he's more consistent and he's physical and he can do all the things that Alex Harrison can do, maybe even to a lesser degree, if the snapping is better, that's probably going to win, right? And so I think there's a lot going into this position. There's a lot in any part of this offensive line where the offensive line has to gel, right? And you need that center especially to be able to have a good handle of what's going on, right? They've got to be able to see what the defense is lining up as. They've got to be able to help give the reads to the quarterback, make plays that help that. And you've got to have kind of that vocal leader there in that center spot. So whomever comes out of that is going to be really interesting. But I think the tipping force here, assuming that everything is equal or at least close to equal, is going to come down to snaps. So that's going to be the biggest hang up here. Kema didn't have a lot of snaps at Ohio State. He's coming in relatively fresh, and so there's just not a lot of experience there. I think the natural inclination here, just from the offset, is that Al Harrison is the guy, right? He's the guy that's coming in. He's going to be the guy to lose that job or not, right? But it's his jobs to lose, essentially. He's had 143 snaps at Utah last year. His grading is offensively 68.2, so one of the highest of that. Well, it is the highest of that group. Run blocking is a 69.7, and a pass blocking is a 69.4. So, solid numbers, need to improve, but I think if he can get those snaps down, I think you're going to see him at that center position, and be the leader for this team. He's been there for a long time. He's from the state of Utah. He knows this program inside and out. There's a lot to love about him in that position, but he's got to be able to perform. Next, at right guard, it's probably going to be Keith Olson. I can't imagine a world where it's not him. He's taken 295 snaps last year. He filled in a lot of good time last year. If I remember correctly, he was pretty solid at the Las Vegas Bowl and what he was able to do there. Good addition for Utah there on the line. I think you got a lot of experience there. Offensive grade is 64.6, run blocking 59.6, and pass blocking 77. So once again, the pass blocking, those numbers have been higher. Now, granted, a lot of people are a little bit higher. Those are a little bit more inflated than the run blocking ones, but still a solid score for him, and I think that gives Utah a good opportunity there. Lastly, on right tackle, I have slated in Cedric Jefferson. This is the Montana State transfer. He's had a ton of snaps, 945 snaps at Montana State. The difference there is he's coming from the FCS level to the FBS level. And I'd argue more than any position in the football program, the offensive line is probably the toughest to acclimate from FCS to FBS. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean that he's incapable or he's not able to have that physicality. The difference here is more in terms of the dedication to the craft, right? In the FCS programs, you don't always have position coaches that are going to be riding you as hard like you do in the FBS, right? You've got dedicated situations where it's nutrition, you've got position coaches, you've got graduate assistants, you've got assistant coaches, you've got so many more resources at the FBS level. So this becomes much more of a job than it did at the FCS level, where there's a lot of that stuff where you're doing on your own. That's not to say that there aren't good coaches or these coaches aren't helping them at the FCS level, but it becomes much more cemented at the FBS level. And Jefferson talked about this. He talked about the biggest change for him isn't necessarily the physicality on the line. Yes, that is an aspect of it that you just have to become more physical on the line, right? Like you have to understand that. You have to understand what it takes to be able to play at this level. But it's more about treating this as a full-time job, right? Is understanding what it takes to be able to compete at this level. Now, in spring, there was no indications that he didn't have what it takes to be there. Now, that's not to say that he won every rep and that he was just this perfect right tackle. That right side can get blown up quite a bit from the defense because they were doing really well to put him in situations that he wasn't used to. But I think you've got a guy that has experience, right? And experience can sometimes outweigh a lot of these other situations of the fundamentals and the techniques. Like obviously that's important, especially as a lineman, but the experience and being able to be there and do it on a higher pedigreed team in the FCS, that helps, right? So I think Utah's not so far off with him. I think he's got a good opportunity to move forward with this team in terms of being a part of that starting unit. And I think there's nothing that has shown that he could lose that job. Once again, that's not to say that he won't lose that job or that he couldn't, but I think he is clearly the best option at right tackle to be able to help that, a mixture of his physicality, a mixture of his experience. That goes a long way. But at the end of the day, it's about getting the best five together. So if he has the most experience, but there's a fifth person that they need to throw in there that fits better, they're going to do that. And I think you're going to see a lot of mixing and matching and Jordan Gross trying to work really hard to make sure that this works. There's a lot about this unit that is great, but it's not going to be an easy situation, right? If they can gel early, and like I said, you get Idaho first, that's going to be a good test, give you a nice opportunity to kind of get that rust off, see how you're doing before you jump into Arkansas, which will be a tougher test. Arkansas is, up and down every other year, whatever it may be. We'll jump into how they look here soon, but you're going to at least have an early easy test mixed with now a tougher test against an SEC talent-laden team that's going to give you a good mixture of how it can be. And then you round that out with kind of your B level team of Utah State, where that gives you kind of this whole arsenal of levels of teams that you can manage before you get into Big 12 play. And the benefit for Utah too is early on in Big 12 play, Utah has kind of the easier load of the schedule. The toughest part of their schedule is more backloaded. So there is time for this offensive line to gel if they can do it correctly. So I think there's opportunities here where if there are struggles and Utah feels like these are things that they can fix, they can do that fairly early. Now, some of those things you just can't fix once it's there, right? You can't just make somebody more physical. You can't fix some of these things when you're in the middle of the season, but at least you have a little bit more of a ramp up period to help the team than maybe some other years. Now, quickly going with the backups that I have here, left tackle Ike Garcia. He's coming off of, multiple injuries, but he's really starting to feel good about himself and what he's able to do. I can see him challenging for one of these positions. Obviously, there was a lot of praise for him coming in out of high school. It just hasn't materialized yet because of injuries. We'll see what happens there. Kelvin Obot, really, it's just becoming more physical. It's getting the right frame, getting the physicality down, being able to do what he needs to. The talent is there. It's really just getting him to the level that he needs to compete at a consistent basis. And if that means he works himself into the offensive line starting unit this year, all the better for Utah, because now you have a similar Spencer Fano, Caleb Lomu type situation where you can build into that. But like Caleb Lomu, you don't necessarily need to start your first year to have that same success, right? I think Utah is in a good position where they can afford to have Kelvin Obot be in the second unit if they need to. Obviously, if he's the best player to fit into that offensive line starting unit, then you put him in. But I think with where they're at, they don't need him to hit immediately. You'd love to. You'd love to have your 5-star offensive tackle or offensive lineman. They've had him at guard in spring, so maybe he shifts inside for the immediacy just to kind of help him get reps. That whatever happens, you can get him in there. That's great, but I don't think that they need to if they don't need to. Beyond that, you have 3 other players in Roger Alderman, Soren Scheinfeld, and Reese Parmenter, who have varying degrees of snaps at Utah. I think you've got some success there. Parmenter actually has, of his 84 snaps, has one of the highest pass blocking grades of an 80.5. Filled in pretty nicely for Utah for a while, was a walk-on that got a scholarship, has done really well for Utah. It's just a matter of kind of how he can acclimate. So I think those are the names that you can kind of pay attention to. But outside of, I think, Ike Garcia and Kelvin Obot, those are probably your, 6, 7, 8 type players, counting Isaiah Kemma in there, where you have 8 players that you feel comfortable about. Alderman, Scheinfeld, and Parmenter are capable, but I think there's probably a step down in them from the other guys. So there's that. Shifting to tight end. Now, tight end's a very interesting position because I don't think Utah is going to utilize tight ends the same as they have in years past. I know they're not, right? You're not lining up and getting 12, 13 personnel out there and trying to put as many tight ends out there. But this is a unit that absolutely can find themselves on the field if they need to. And so it's going to be really interesting to see kind of quote unquote starters versus backups. And a lot of these positions, especially, there's going to be a lot of fluidity to it. You're going to see certain looks where at 2nd and 10, this is the player that comes out, and 3rd and 1, you're going to get different looks. And you've got maybe more of your traditional tight ends, a la Hunter Andrews, Noah Benny. Noah Benny's more hand in the dirt type guy. Hunter Andrews more of kind of the prototypical modern tight end who can get their hands dirty, but they're more of a pass catching tight end. Those are kind of those guys as well. Or those are the guys that you're used to seeing at tight end. And then you've got this other position inside that position of the rhinos, right? Where you've got Semi Taulanga, Sione Motupuaka, who are going to act as kind of a fullback hybrid tight end. They're going to be featured into this as more of a jumbo sets, but they're not just there to block, right? They're going to be pass catchers. It's really going to be fascinating to see how these guys acclimate. Those 4 players that I listed, I'm calling your starters. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how you consider them starters in a traditional sense, just because I don't know exactly how Kevin McGivern is going to operate. There will be tight ends on the field, right? Like this isn't like Utah's going, full send on wide receivers only and then running backs and having no tight ends out there. But it's a matter of how they're going to line up. That's not to say that you couldn't get 11 or 12 personnel, 13 personnel at times, but I don't think that that's going to be as heavily featured as we've seen in years past. With that said, Hunter Andrews becomes the star of the class, right? If we're talking anybody in that class, Hunter Andrews coming off of his injury, he's the guy that they feel most excited about simply because of what he was able to do before he got injured. He had 4 games last year, had a season-ending injury, wasn't able to be factored into the season, but for him, he was a perfect 10 of 10 on targets and catches. So didn't drop one pass. He was great. They had him lined up, on the line. They every once in a while flexed him out into the slot. But this is a guy that can be anything for Utah. Noah Benny, like I said, he's more of a hand in the dirt type tight end, but that's not to say he can't be a pass catcher as well. Think of more Cole Fotheringham if you're thinking of a tight end there. He's who you can look at for that. So there's that. And then obviously your 2 rhinos, they're going to be just an exciting element of this team. If these guys don't have at minimum 5 catches each, I'm going to be disappointed because I want to see what they're able to do. Also, though, I mean, maybe not. You don't need to get too gadgetry, right? Like I don't think you want to go too crazy. But if it works, I mean, these are guys that are actually shifty for their size. They're big bodies that it's going to be very tough for these guys to bring down. I mean, can you imagine like this 5'10" corner trying to bring down this 335-pound Semi Taulonga? The semi truck is coming and there's no stopping him. So he's going to bulldoze his way to the end zone, which I think is going to be really fascinating and see how they materialize into the offense. With that, your backups right now, I say you've got Will Money, comes from Oklahoma State. Not a lot of reps. Curious to see how he factors in, but I just think there's so much more talent ahead of him that he's going to work his way into it. But he'll factor in. And then Kenai Lopes, another guy that has transitioned to the offensive side of the ball after being a linebacker, really started to look good in spring. I think there's a lot of potential for him. He's rangy. He's tall, and so he can go up and get those balls. I think there's a lot of potential there. I just don't know that this is the year quite for him. I think there's a learning curve for him, but I think he's making some great strides where if he can get into the game this year at tight end, that's going to help him a ton next year. And I think next year is probably more of a breaking out type year for him. So really fascinated to see the tight ends. I think that's going to be a fascinating position group. But like I said, it's going to look different than what we've seen in years past. But at the same time, it can have a lot of the same characteristics where Utah is going to emphasize them, right? There's a reason why tight ends have become so in vogue in college and in the NFL is because they're difficult mismatches, right? They make it really tough for defense to be able to understand what they need to do. Because not only do you have to protect the outside, you now have to protect these big-bodied players that if they catch it, they can get in space. They're tough to bring down. So really curious to see how they work into this. But like I said, Hunter Andrews, of those starting caliber players, is probably going to be the one that sees the field the most. But those rhinos are going to be on the field a lot. I think you're going to see a lot of jumbo sets there. That'll help Devin Dampier or Bird Ficklin roll out. There's a lot of advantages to having them in that position, especially with their bigger bodies, but also how shifty they are and what they're able to do, being as pass catchers as well. So there's that. Let's jump to wide receiver. And this is the position group that I think is going to be of most intrigue to everybody this year. Obviously, the offensive line is going to be the engine that makes this team go. But I think with the emphasis in trying to get the ball out more and be a little bit more pass heavy, I know that there's a lot of conversations about Kevin McGivern being more pass heavy. That's not to say that this is suddenly going to be an air raid type unit, but I think you're going to see a larger emphasis on trying to stretch the field, trying to make sure that they can use their receivers in a way that allows guys like Wayshawn Parker to work in the run game. Many people still think that Utah is going to go to its tried and true of running the ball, which is, it's not going to go away. You've got, at minimum 3 guys that are experienced and veterans there that you've got to get their ball in their hands to run. But at the same time, you've got to stretch that field. You look at that Texas Tech game, and there's a lot of factors that go into that game with Devin Dampier being hurt and banged up. But there was a big reason for Utah not being able to be successful in that game, not counting Texas Tech's defense. They were, lights out, one of the best in the country this last year. One of their biggest issues is they couldn't get the ball out to a wide receiver, right? And they had to resort to a lot of screen plays, which clearly didn't work because they could predict that. They knew that they could blow it up and then they could over pursue, and then it's much more physical and that box gets loaded. That didn't help Utah in any bit. And so you start rushing things aren't working. Honestly, if you could have gotten that Jackson Benny touchdown, taken him over the top, that would have relaxed things a little bit, at least give them that idea of the threat. Plus, you would have had a score that helped, right? The unfortunate thing is there was just a penalty. But I think with this team, if they can, if you can get even marginally better than last year, I think that goes a long way for this team because you know that they can run. But I think you've got a much better advantage in this team in the wide receivers where Utah can utilize their talent, arguably one of the best rooms that they've had in years, at least top to bottom, right? Guys that have contributed, have done well, have the ability to be able to do what they need to. I think this gives Utah a good advantage in what they're able to do. So looking at the starters here, I'm going to list 5. These rotate in and out, right? Like obviously you've got most likely three receivers on the field at any given time. But I'm going to list 5 players that I think are starter caliber, and how they factor in what they do remains to be seen. But I think these are going to be your 5 main guys that you focus on. First is going to be Braden Pagan. He's your X receiver, right? He's your wide receiver 1 that everybody's going to focus on. Rangy, physical, experienced, had 926 yards last year, 5 touchdowns. They would love to be able to have him. He's only dropped 3.2% of his passes last year. So anything you bring into his range, he's generally going to bring it down, which says a lot for what Utah needs to do, right? Whether it be 50-50 balls, over the shoulder, whatever it may be, Braden Pagan on paper and at least last year showed that he can be the guy to be an X factor for this team. Clearly, he's the guy that everybody's going to focus on in terms of the first name on the paper, just simply because of the expectations coming on his shoulders. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see how he's able to separate, if he's able to have similar success to last year. If you can get him close to 1,000 years, Utah is going to be in a great position, quite honestly. I think, did I say years? 1,000 yards? I don't know what I said. Some reason years is ringing in my head. So 1,000 yards. If you can get him close to 1,000 yards, this is a huge opportunity for Utah, and that bodes really well for what they need to do. Next is Larry Simmons. This is going to be a huge year for him, I think. I think he's made tremendous strides in spring. There's a lot of potential for him. He's a guy that came on strong, especially late in the year, was catching a lot of touchdown passes, had 6 touchdowns, had 280 yards. A guy that has the potential to just really stretch the field and be a game changer for Utah. Whether it be intermediate routes or deep routes, I think Larry Simmons is going to be a really strong receiver for Utah and what he's able to do. Then there's Kyrie Scholes, San Jose State receiver, second leading receiver for them. 768 yards, 2 touchdowns. Another guy that most likely will work out of the slot. But at the same time, he was used primarily outside at San Jose State. So I don't want to tab him as one. I think there's a lot of potential for him to mix it in and out. But if you can get Pagan, Simmons, and Scholes all in at the same time, I think you're in a really good situation in terms of what you can do. Then you pair that up with, Hunter Andrews, or you put in one of the Rhinos or whatever it may be. You've got a good complementary set of players that can do what you need to. And that's not even mentioning Creed Whittemore, who just had a phenomenal spring. Like there were so many plays that he made where he got separation, but then he found ways to be able to make guys miss, right? It wasn't just getting open to pass it or catch it. It was getting open and then making, yak after that. There was a lot of opportunities for him. There is a lot of opportunities for him to take that next level. And I'm really fascinated to see his development and what he's able to do. If he has anything close to what his spring looked like, and look, spring is a completely different look. So I don't want to take that too much, with a grain of salt. We see these players a lot of times in spring, they pop off and then it comes in fall and it changes. But I think if he can make those strides. And I know he's motivated. He's got one of his favorite position coaches out there, coaching him up. I think if he can make those strides, he's going to be a name that's really going to pop off for Utah this year. And then Ricky Parks is a guy that, he hasn't had a lot of snaps just simply because he's younger. He only played in 3 games last year for Mississippi State, but he also comes in with Chad Bumpus, has a lot of experience in his kind of structure. But he's a guy that many people talked about as just being a very smart player and understanding how to play the game. We saw a lot of grabs from him in spring and what he's able to do. A lot of people mentioned him as a guy that is going to break out. And so I'm really curious to see how he factors into that. But if all 5 of these guys can be contributing guys to the level that we think they can. Now, I don't expect Pagan to go get 926 again and Scholes to get 768. If you do, all the best for Utah, right? I mean, that's 1,600 yards right there between the 2 players. That's a huge opportunity for Utah. And I think Utah is going to be at the top of the conference if you've got 2 players anywhere near that kind of level of production, to say nothing of all these other players that I've just mentioned. Beyond that, your backups right now that I would list is Dadrian Zipperer. He was tabbed as going to be your starter last year, right? Season-ending injury kept that from happening. I'm curious to see where he's able to get and how he fits in with this unit. I don't know in spring that we were able to get a lot from him just simply because he's still acclimating from that. And so I'm curious to see what that looks like for Dadrian Zipperer, but a talented guy, a guy that can get over the top. How does he factor in? Nate Johnson looks like I've mentioned this. He looks like a wide receiver now. I don't think he's quite to that level of being a starter caliber, but that's not to say that he's not going to factor into this team. I think there's a lot of opportunities for him, and I think he kind of like a Creed Whittemore type scenario. There's going to be a huge glow up, or it has the potential to be a huge glow up for him, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Then there's Tobias Merriweather, who has the size, he's got the traits. We just haven't seen it all come together. I don't know that Utah needs to rely on him this year like they thought that they needed to last year, and so there's opportunities for him to surprise, and if you can get anything out of him more than you got last year, I think that's a win, right? And I think that's a good opportunity for Utah to have. And then there's Mana Carvalho, mostly a special teams guy, but I think there's opportunities there where you can utilize him. I just don't. I think he's more at the bottom of that list right now. There's more talented receivers there on the field that will get time before he does. But he's young. He's still going to contribute on special teams and what he's able to do. Shifty, obviously, and a good player for Utah. Let's shift over now to running back. This is a pretty obvious one in a lot of respects. I'm going to list 2 starters here, though. And your 2 starters, in my view, is obviously Wayshawn Parker. I think he's going to have a much better season this year. And I think the complementary side of the wide receivers being able to be more effective will have a lot of opportunity, or will give him a lot of opportunity to be more successful, because it's going to open up the lanes a little bit more. It's going to relax things more if that works, right? He can still produce if it's not, but you don't have that same offensive line that's going to give him those gaps that maybe he had last year, or the opportunities that he had last year. There's going to be a lot more on his shoulders to be able to push forward. Like I said, I don't think this is impossible, but I think if that receiving game is able to be effective, Wayshawn is going to cook. And I think you're going to see him emerge effectively as running back 1, right? You got that especially late in the season, but they took time to be able to get him into that. He split a lot of reps with Nakari Rogers. And I think it was more just kind of a message to him to say, hey, like, you got to take this on. So he has taken that on in spring. I think you're seeing much more of a leadership role from him and what he's able to do. But, it's got to manifest itself, and I think it will. Next, I've got Daniel Bray. There was just so much talk about him and what he's able to do. He's much more committed to the program and dialed in what he needs to do personally. And he's shifty as all get out. You get him in open space and there's no stopping him. I mean, he's a guy that in a second, he can do a jump cut that just absolutely destroys you. And, we saw that in West Virginia, what he was able to do there. I'm really fascinated to see Utah utilize him more than they did. Kevin McGivern said in his very first conversation with us at spring that he wants to use Daniel Bray a ton. Now, what that means, I don't know. Obviously, you're not just going to have everything on Wayshawn, but how does he factor in and where do they go? I think there's going to be a lot of potential there. Your backups is going to be San Jose State transfer Steve Chavez Soto, a guy that led the team with rushing yards, but just he's still got a next step to go. And I think he's going to be utilized. It's just a matter of how much and what you need. But I think he's a guy that can absolutely give Utah some juice, maybe help him make, third down, short down situations. But Utah doesn't want to be a telltale team in this regard. They want him to be a pass catcher as well. They want him to be able to not just be a guy that you bring in and it's like, oh, it's third and short, we're going to put him in and tell everybody what we're going to do. There's going to be a lot of versatility to him. And if he can take that next step, I think that's where, Utah feels like they can grow a lot. Then there's, freshman LaMarcus Bell, a lot of love and hype around him. And I think he came in ready, good frame, good body. It's just more working into that, right? Trying to get into what he needs to do as a freshman, also being a pass catcher and what he's able to do. He and Chavez Soto worked a ton at the jugs machine, trying to perfect that and trying to get better. How do they factor in? I think you're going to see all of these guys, but I think the ones that are going to get the lion's share of this is obviously Wayshawn Parker, and I think Daniel Bray is going to be your number 2 in that regard. Lastly, we're going to go with quarterback. This is no surprise, but it's a unique one. Devin Dampier is your number 1 starter, right? There's no, it's unquestioned, but it's not quite a all-inclusive situation because you do have Bird Ficklin. Now, Utah obviously is going to try to get both of these players on the field at certain times. I've always been of the mindset where if you're going to put Bird out on the field with Devin, however you manage that, one of them has to do something. They can't just be on there as a decoy, at least a majority of the time. They can be decoys, but if you're going to put them on, you're just taking another position away from somebody else who could be an asset for your team, right? You're essentially playing 11 on 10, which doesn't always help you. Now, it can work in some scenarios, and I think Utah's going to find some, I wouldn't even call it trickeration, but find some unique scenarios where both of these players can contribute. It's just going to be interesting to see how this all comes together and what they're able to do. But both of these players are going to see time. I don't see a world where it's just Devin and Bird sits on the sideline doing nothing. They want to keep him engaged because he is an athlete. But at the same time, you do need to make sure that you're not putting both of your quarterbacks at risk, because beyond that, it's a massive drop. You've got 2 freshmen that just quite honestly aren't ready yet. If you're getting to that level in Kane Archer and Mike Johnson, the season's probably lost. I don't see a world where losing Devin and Bird and you can continue to keep those strides. Now, maybe there's some things that Utah can do to kind of simplify it. I just think if you lose Devin and Bird, it becomes a much bigger challenge. And so I think there's going to be some stuff there that they have to be very careful with to make sure that you're not putting your quarterbacks in harm's way. And I don't think they're intentionally trying to do that. Injuries happen, right? But I think you've got both of these players on the field, it just increases your chance of injury for either or both. But I think you're going to see a lot of complementary play from them. Devin will be your starter, right? Like, you're not going to take the ball out of his hands. He's a veteran leader. He's got kind of that it factor in terms of just being able to get in there and do what he needs to win games. You saw that in the Kansas State game. You saw that in the Kansas game. You've seen that in many games where he gets in there and he kind of takes it to that next level, similar to how Cam Rising did it late in the games, where you just take it to that next level and you kind of put the team on your shoulders. And you need somebody that's that glue guy that can do that. That's not to say Bird isn't that player yet, but you don't want him to be that player yet. You want the ball in Devin's hands to be able to make those decisions because he's done it, he's shown it, and he can be effective. So you want to keep Devin as long as you can. With that said, you want to be able to feature Bird as well, because you saw what he was able to do. 513 rushing yards last year, 10 touchdowns rushing, 13 total in terms of 3 passing. He's effective, right? And I think he's got a pretty ball. Like, he's able to do what he needs to. It's just a matter of piecing it all together as he develops and progresses in the program. But Devin is clearly your guy. You've got to be able to rely on him. And I think if you can get both of these guys effectively playing, Utah's going to be in a world of comfort, right? It's going to be a good situation for them. With all that said, at the end of the day, I honestly think it's going to come down to that offensive line. I'm going to reiterate that because I think that's really what it's going to come down to. It's not an easy situation. But it's one that you kind of have to go with, right? There's no other choice but to be able to do that. And I think if Utah can find success with that, that bodes well for the next years, right? Because now you've got less of a changeover. There's still going to be change, but you've got less changeover from that. You've got some consistency. And if you can do that and build on it, it's going to be all the better for Utah. So whether this is an 8-win team or 10-win team, whatever it may be, I think the offensive line is really going to come into being the determining factor with that. Not even counting Morgan Scalley as a first-year head coach, that kind of stuff. All that stuff matters, and it just means that Utah has to hit on a lot more things that may not be as easy. So with that, we'll sign off today. We're going to jump into all the schedules starting next week. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting into these teams and seeing how they're made up and what they present to Utah. So we'll sign off today. I hope you all have a great day, and we will chat with you later.